The day started out no different from any other. It was 7:30 in the morning, and Jake was standing at his kitchen window with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The ranch looked peaceful in the early light. Cattle shifted lazily in the distance. Birds called out from the tree line. The kind of ordinary rural morning that reminded him why he loved this land he had worked so hard to maintain. But in the middle of that calm, something interrupted the rhythm. A flash of bright yellow that didn't belong. Jake squinted, then frowned. Just beyond the fence line, planted right on the edge of the county road, stood a bright yellow arrow sign. As he stepped outside to get a better look, another sign revealed itself, further down the road. Then another. It was like following a neon breadcrumb trail, leading directly to his main gate. Each of the signs read Realtor Caravan 150 with bold arrows pointing the way, as if his ranch were a tourist attraction instead of private property. He walked to the gate, coffee in hand, and stood there taking it in. The last small arrow was planted not 10 feet from his iron gate, pointing directly at his property like it was their next big venue. He muttered a low curse under his breath. This wasn't coincidental, too many signs, too professional. Someone had planned this as though they owned the place. That's when neighbor Rick appeared, strolling over with that familiar combination of amusement and disbelief on his face. "Jake," he joked, waving toward the yellow arrow. "You planning on throwing a party for the whole county? Because it looks like the invitations already went out." Jake shook his head slowly, lips pressed tight. "First I'm hearing of it. I didn't authorize a damn thing." Rick chuckled, though uneasily, and pulled out his phone to start snapping pictures of the signs. "Might want to document this before it gets interesting," he suggested. Jake nodded in agreement. Rick had lived next door long enough to know when trouble was brewing, and his instinct said this was only the beginning. Jake's phone buzzed just then with a notification email. He opened it, and for the first time his hands actually shook. The subject line read, "Ranch Reservation Confirmation." At the top was the name Denise Caldwell, president of the HOA that controlled the subdivision bordering his ranch. The short, arrogant email stated plainly that his property had been reserved for their Realtor Caravan event, scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. 150 agents were expected to arrive for a community showcase tour. She even had the nerve to claim that the trailhead access was included under CC&R provisions. Jake nearly laughed at the absurdity. Their covenants, conditions, and restrictions applied to their subdivision, not his privately owned ranch. It was like someone claiming their neighborhood rules entitled them to park in another man's garage. Scrolling further down, Jake found an attachment. It wasn't a public invitation. It was a full map, GPS, geofence, and all, marking his gate as the exact check-in point for the event. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't sloppy. This was meticulous. Somebody in that HOA had deliberately programmed the event app to mark his locked private gate as the red dot destination for 150 strangers. Rick leaned over Jake's shoulder to read the email, then let out a long whistle. "She's got nerve." "I'll give her that," Jake exhaled bitterly. Nerve or something worse. Barely 20 minutes later, he had proof of just how seriously people were taking Denise's reservation. A car slowed near the gate as a woman in business attire peered at her phone screen, then at the sign, then at the lock on his gate. Confusion was written all over her face. Rick called out across the driveway. "Looking for the realtor thing?" She nodded, waving her phone. "The app says check-in is here, but the gate's locked." Jake approached her calmly. "That's because this is a private ranch, not an event venue." She blinked in shock, holding up her phone as if that would resolve everything. There, glowing bright red, was the digital pin right at his front gate. He asked her where she got the location, and she showed him the exact same email from Denise forwarded by her real estate office. He kept his cool, telling her kindly she should probably call the event organizers for better directions. She apologized, walked back to her car, and promised she'd wait on the public road until someone clarified. Jake turned back toward Rick with a grim smile. "This is just the start, isn't it?" Rick nodded thoughtfully, taking another photo of the signs. "I'd say you've got about 90 minutes before this gets really interesting." And he was right. Within the hour, more cars slowed near the arrows, phones out, GPS screens glowing, confused people pointing at his locked gate. It was like watching a glitch in the Matrix play out in real time. But this wasn't a tech error. This was coordinated, Someone had made arrow signs, uploaded maps, sent hundreds of emails, and never once thought to ask if the property owner agreed. Jake stepped back inside, topped off his coffee, and stared out the window. His cup rattled against the counter, not from nerves but from sheer disbelief. The HOA hadn't just overreached. They had dragged vendors, professionals, and 150 strangers into a nightmare that was about to play out at his gate. And though the cattle stirred lazily in the pastures outside, Jake knew the peace of his quiet morning was already gone. Tomorrow, the digital red dot would lead a caravan of cars straight to his doorstep, and the only thing standing between him and 150 uninvited guests was a locked gate and the truth. By mid-morning, Jake's ranch had become an accidental stage. What was once his peaceful property line was now an uninvited theater for a circus he hadn't agreed to. The arrow signs pointing to his locked gate were no longer just curiosities. They were magnets pulling strangers straight to his front entrance. Behind the calm surface of cattle mooing in the pasture, Jake could feel the tension building in the air. Rick, ever the pragmatic neighbor, kept his phone out like a roving reporter. He photographed every angle of the setup, the yellow directional signs, the confused real estate agent snapping shots of the gate, and the email copy Jake had received that morning. "Trust me," Rick muttered. "Documentation always matters. People forget the details, but a picture can't lie." Jake nodded silently, appreciating Rick's steady presence. It was good to have someone else witnessing this insanity firsthand. The first taste of real confrontation arrived not through words, but through action. Around noon, a work truck pulled up, its logo slapped across the side in bold lettering. A man in a polo shirt and reflective sunglasses climbed out, clipboard in hand, the kind of look professionals wear when following a work order. He walked to Jake's gate confidently and began inspecting the locking mechanism, as though he had every right in the world to be there. Jake approached slowly, coffee thermos in hand. "Can I help you?" he asked flatly. The man didn't even flinch. "I'm here to check access for the caravan event. Got the work order right here from the HOA. They cleared this job." He tapped the clipboard like it was proof enough. Jake's jaw tightened. He stared at the clipboard, then back at the man. "This is private property, not part of your HOA. The gate isn't yours to open." The worker frowned and double-checked his papers. "It says Community Ranch Access Point here," he replied, confused. "I was told to verify this location could handle heavy vehicle traffic. It doesn't mention needing your signature, just says HOA authorization." "Authorization that doesn't apply here," Jake shot back. Rick, appearing like clockwork, sauntered up with his phone camera ready. "You might want to hold off on touching that gate," he suggested calmly, "because this is going to end up in the sheriff's report if you keep going." The worker's confidence faltered. His eyes darted from Jake's stern face to Rick's phone, then down to his clipboard. Suddenly the job didn't look so simple anymore. Jake pressed further, holding his hand out. "Let me see your certificate of insurance for this event." The worker hesitated before producing the folder. Jake flipped through the documents, his finger trailing across the fine print. The event location listed on the form described something vague, Community Ranch Access. But the space labeled Additional Insured was blank. No Jake Hollis, no owner coverage, nothing tying this insurance to him. He lowered the papers deliberately, voice steady but rising for the group of confused realtors that had begun to gather nearby. "This doesn't cover my ranch. If someone steps on my land and breaks a leg, this insurance is useless. You and I would both be in trouble." The contractor swallowed, his hand trembling slightly. "Maybe I should call my office," he muttered. "Yes," Jake said firmly, "do that right now. Before this turns into trespassing, on camera." He motioned toward the cluster of realtors who had already raised their phones to record. The tension tilted instantly. Liability was no longer just his problem. It was suddenly the contractor's problem, too. As the man stepped aside to make his nervous phone call, Rick jabbed his finger toward another issue. "You notice that check-in table?" Jake turned, and sure enough, further down the road, a pop-up canopy had appeared, with folding chairs and an orange cone barrier guiding cars into neat little rows. The table was set on the county road shoulder, public right-of-way. "That's an encroachment," Rick said firmly. "They need a county permit for that." "Which I bet they don't have." Jake's mouth curled into a thin smile. Every layer of this fiasco was collapsing under its own arrogance. He walked back to his truck, pulled out a fresh sheet of poster board and uncapped a black marker. In bold strokes he wrote, "No event without owner's written permission." He attached the sign directly to the gate right above the lock where nobody could miss it. The contractor hung up his call, jaw tight. "Dispatcher says we can't proceed without insurance and property owner approval." He gestured toward Jake's new sign. "Looks like we don't have either." Without another word, he started packing up his tools. Rick snapped another photo of the departing truck. Evidence, evidence, evidence. But while one problem left, another was just arriving. A wave of SUVs and sedans began parking neatly along the road. Door after door opened, men and women in suits stepping out with clipboards and iced coffee, adjusting sunglasses, talking amongst themselves as though the event was already underway. More folding chairs appeared. A banner half unrolled in the wind boasted in cheerful letters, "Caravan 150. Jake's pulse kicked harder. This was no longer a matter of confusion. It was an organized invasion powered by miscommunication and blind trust in HOA authority. The coffee in his thermos was ice cold now, but his resolve felt sharper than ever. At his gate stood a new undeniable line in black marker. "No event without permission." Behind him stood Rick with his phone camera, committed to recording every frame of injustice. In front of him marched wave after wave of strangers armed with paperwork, GPS apps, and blind assumptions. The first confrontations were over. The bigger battle was only beginning. By the time the afternoon sun was climbing high, Jake thought the situation couldn't get more absurd. The signs, the vendor, the gathering caravan had already felt like a trespasser's circus. But then Rick jogged up from the back fence with urgency in his steps, and that expression Jake had come to recognize. Something crazy was happening again. "Jake," he said, breathing hard. "They're trying to go around back." Jake grabbed his keys, tossed his thermos in the truck, and followed Rick toward the utility easement that cut along the ranch's south line. Sure enough, there they were. Half a dozen people in business clothes, clipboard in hand, marching confidently down the narrow dirt utility path like it was some kind of designated trail. At their lead was a woman pointing out the terrain as if she had scouted a new front entrance. Except this road, clearly marked with signage, existed only for one function: giving the electric company access to maintain their equipment. To Jake, watching them stroll toward his land felt like déjà vu, all arrogance. No permission. When Jake intercepted the group, the woman turned with a professional smile, clipboard poised as though ready to deliver an explanation polished by rehearsal. "We were told this utility easement provides legal access to your ranch property," she said brightly. "Our research indicated it was a viable route for the caravan." Jake stared for a beat, then simply pointed to the bold red letter sign on the gate. "Authorized utility vehicles only. No public access." His voice was calm but firm. "This road belongs to the power company, not your HOA. It's not a hiking trail and it's not an event entrance." The group looked unsettled, but not entirely convinced. That's when a white utility company truck rolled up, dust rising in its wake. Out stepped Mark Bradley, the technician responsible for maintaining this section of line. With folder in hand and a no-nonsense gaze, he wasted no time. "Afternoon, Jake, got your call," he said before turning to the clipboard crew. His tone switched to formal, the kind used by people whose words carry official weight. "This easement is strictly for electrical maintenance. Period. It cannot be used for public assembly or events under any circumstances." He then pulled out an official letter printed on utility company letterhead, pointing out the exact clauses that prohibited the very thing they were attempting. Each page was like a hammer driving the point home. They had no right to be there. The group's leader tried to salvage her footing, insisting that the shared easement allowed for community access. But Mark cut her off with an almost weary patience. "No, ma'am. That's not how easements work. This is property designated only for power line service. It's not yours, it's not theirs, and it's definitely not public. Unauthorized use here is a safety and liability violation." He pointed up at the power lines humming faintly overhead. "You want to take 150 people strolling around under high-voltage equipment? That's not just bad planning, it's dangerous." The firmness in his tone left no room for debate. Behind him, Rick snapped photos of the utility signage, the group milling awkwardly by their cars, and Mark posting a closure notice on the easement gate. The timing couldn't have been better. Mark checked his schedule and announced, As a matter of fact, we've got routine inspection scheduled starting today at 2 o'clock. This service road is closed for maintenance to all non-utility traffic until further notice. He slapped the notice onto the gate with finality. Faces in the group fell. Their backup plan had just crumbled faster than the first one. The clipboard woman looked down at her notes, then back at her colleagues, her confidence now clearly shaken. They came looking for a loophole and found nothing but a locked gate, reinforced with corporate authority. As Jake watched them shuffle back toward their cars, muttering and dialing numbers on their phones, he felt his anger cool into something heavier. Almost pity. These weren't soldiers, they were pawns. Realtors, vendors, coordinators all dancing at the end of Denise Caldwell's strings, brought to his ranch under the false banner of legitimacy. Mark gathered his papers and clapped Jake on the shoulder. If anyone else tries this, call me. The utility company doesn't tolerate trespassing. We know where the lines are drawn. Jake nodded, thanking him sincerely, while Rick added another round of photos to the swelling evidence file. For Jake, however, the realization hit with a thud. This wasn't confusion. This was coordinated. These people had maps, orders, and insurance folders. They believed someone in authority had guaranteed them access, which meant Denise hadn't just been reckless, she had been deliberate. Forged emails, GPS programming, vendors on work orders, and now a backup easement strategy. It was systematic, organized, intentional. No matter how many signs or laws proved otherwise, Denise had set all of this in motion without once asking the only opinion that mattered, the property owners. And right here, on a dust-coated back road, Jake realized this fight wasn't about one event. It was about drawing a permanent line in the sand. The next morning found Jake sitting in a very different seat, across the desk from Ellen Carter at the county office. Ellen was the kind of official who had seen just about every mistake homeowners and HOAs could possibly make. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and handled documents with the practiced precision of someone who knew exactly how much trouble a single piece of paperwork could cause. Spread out in front of her were piles of evidence, Jake's forwarded emails, Rick's photos of directional signs, insurance certificates, and copies of so-called authorization. Ellen studied the incriminating email claiming the county had already given permission for the event. She printed out the header information, the behind-the-scenes digital trail most people never notice, and circled a line in red ink. "Jake," she said, tapping firmly on the paper, "this didn't come from county servers. It came from the HOA's own newsletter account." Her voice was calm but pointed. Then she said the word that made Jake's blood run cold: forgery. Ellen explained that in digital terms this wasn't just sloppy communication. It was the equivalent of someone putting the county seal on fake letterhead and shoving it through a neighbor's mailbox. Forging county approval is no clerical error. It carries consequences. She clicked through database searches on her screen, confirming what Jake already suspected. No permit had ever been filed. No special event authorization. No written landowner consent. Nothing. And yet Denise and her team had distributed a scan labeled consent.jpg, a supposed document of approval. Ellen leaned forward, lowering her voice. That so-called consent avoids using the word written anywhere in its language. That's deliberate. State code requires written and signed authorization from the property owner for any gathering over 50 people. This event was slated for 150. They never had a legal leg to stand on. She slid more papers across the desk. Evidence Jake hadn't even considered yet. Metadata on the file showed it had been created just a week ago, even though the supposed approval was dated a month prior. That's not sloppy, Ellen concluded. That's calculated. By the time Jake walked out of the building, his evidence folder had doubled in thickness. He now carried two things that shifted the entire balance of the conflict: official confirmation that the consent email was fake, and a county-backed statement that no permit had ever been issued. On the ride home, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. When he answered, Denise Caldwell's voice came on, smooth but tight, laced with the tone of someone pretending to fix a mess they'd created. Jake set his phone to speaker and let his desk recorder catch the exchange, perfectly legal in their one-party state. Denise launched into her practice script about community cooperation and positive neighborhood relations. She tried to frame the caravan as nothing more than outreach, a program essential to maintaining their MLS sponsorship. Jake let her talk, sipping coffee silently. Then calmly he asked the one question that cut through all her fumbling. How many attendees do you need to meet MLS compliance? Denise didn't hesitate. 50 confirmed attendees, she admitted, but 150 ensures certification security. There it was, the motive, laid out in her professional voice, captured on tape. This wasn't about community spirit. It was a business numbers game, and she had treated his ranch as nothing more than a box to tick. Her mistake came when she volunteered to send him the official route sheet. 10 minutes later, Jake had it printed on his kitchen table, camera panning slowly over the damning words. Ranch gate check-in, 2:30 p.m. With HOA logos stamped at the top, the document laid out an itinerary of stops across the subdivision. But the final destination, the grand finale, was right at Jake's front gate. Rick leaned over his shoulder and shook his head. They've actually put it in black and white, he muttered. Written evidence they plan to end everything at your place. Jake forwarded copies of the sheet to Ellen and the sheriff deputy monitoring the situation. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was planned, scheduled, and distributed. Evidence of deliberate deception was growing by the minute. For Jake, the question shifted from what are they doing to how far will they go? The forged emails, the fraudulent map pins, and now an official HOA-branded route sheet painted the picture clearly. Denise Caldwell had orchestrated the invasion of his ranch, fully aware she had no rights there. And now, thanks to digital records and county confirmation, Jake had everything he needed to turn her overreach into her downfall. The following afternoon, the road outside Jake's ranch looked less like quiet countryside and more like the staging area for chaos. Cars lined the shoulder, dozens of agents in suits and dresses stepping out with clipboards, phones, and folding chairs. The HOA banner fluttered weakly from a roadside cone, and a check-in tent sat half-collapsed in the breeze. Directly in front of Jake's locked ranch gate, a locksmith unpacked his tools ready to cut the padlock that stood between one stubborn HOA fantasy and the reality of private property. Jake didn't say a word at first. He simply pointed to the sign he'd nailed to the bars earlier. No event without owner's written permission. The locksmith read the words, frowned, and compared them to the thin HOA work order he'd been given. No signature from Jake, no insurance listing him as covered, just HOA letterhead. Behind them, a restless crowd was muttering, phones raised to record. And then a patrol car pulled up, lights muted but authority undeniable. The deputy stepped out, clipboard in hand, his presence instantly changing the air from smug entitlement to nervous paranoia. The deputy's first move was methodical, examine documents. He checked the insurance certificate the HOA had waved around like a shield, confirmed that Jake's name was nowhere in the additional insured section, then announced this aloud for everyone to hear. This does not cover the property owner. Any incident here would leave liability squarely on the HOA and participants. A ripple passed through the crowd as agents realized their safety net wasn't real. Next, he scrutinized the unpermitted cones, folding chairs, and the registration table sprawled along the county right-of-way. "Do you have permits for this setup?" he asked pointedly. A sheepish guard explained none had been filed. The deputy ordered the road cleared, and a scramble of embarrassed volunteers rushed to drag cones and fold chairs back into minivans. By now, realtors were whispering angrily. Live streams were broadcasting every flustered expression, and Jake could practically hear the HOA president's credibility crumbling in real time. Rick, never missing a beat, snapped picture after picture, grinning slightly as the community event unraveled in the most public way possible. And then Denise arrived. She stepped out of a car boasting HOA decals, her face carefully reconstructed into calm leadership, though the flush on her neck betrayed how close she was to unraveling. She approached the deputy armed with excuses about community traditions and historical trail use. But the deputy stopped her cold with a simple phrase. "Ma'am, HOA bylaws don't override state property law. This ranch is private. End of story." His words were caught on half a dozen phone cameras uploaded within seconds. Denise stammered, scrambling between flimsy arguments. County approval, already proven forged. Trail easements, already blocked. Community benefit, laughed off. Each stumble was another nail in her professional coffin. Ellen from the county office arrived with the forensic evidence proving the consent email originated not from the county, but from the HOA's own servers. She held the packet up for cameras, her calm voice narrating how digital headers revealed spoofing, fraud, premeditated deceit. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Forgery. Some realtors outright said the word, others muttered. She lied to all of us. The deputy jotted everything down, the professionalism in his demeanor highlighting just how small Denise suddenly looked. The rest was collapse in motion. The crowd quickly thinned, cars pulling from the shoulder, frustrated agents angrily calling their offices to report wasted time and canceled certifications. The MLS check-in app pinged phones simultaneously, announcing the location as invalid, event disqualified. Gasps followed by curses rippled through the group. For Denise, humiliation turned fatal to her authority. The deputy began writing citations for unpermitted use of county property, then warned her that the forgery of government consent might constitute criminal charges. Depending on investigators' conclusions, she struggled to respond, cornered under her own lies, knowing she had been publicly unmasked not just by Jake, but by county officials, digital traces, and 150 people with smartphones. By dusk, the road was mostly empty. The trash of a failed event littered near the ditches, cones rolling in the wind. Rick stood beside Jake silently, the two neighbors watching the cattle wander curiously at the commotion's end. Denise, shoulders slumped, offered a halting apology, but it was drowned out by the sound of car doors slamming and angry realtors swearing into their phones. Later that week, the HOA delivered a written apology, admitted wrongdoing in its own bulletin, and suspended Denise from event planning indefinitely. But the damage was already irreparable. Her name had become shorthand for reckless overreach. Jake shut his gate one last time that evening with finality, the lock clicking not just against steel but against the weight of the entire fiasco. In his mailbox sat a new insurance endorsement, delivered the same day, clarifying coverage for invited guests only with explicit language protecting him from unauthorized events. He couldn't help but smile at the timing. The lessons were permanent. No HOA tradition overrules signed permission. GPS dots don't trump deeds. Forged letters and misplaced arrogance fall apart when met with patience, evidence, and the calm lock of steel across a gate. As the sun dropped behind the ranch horizon, Jake felt a wave of clarity. Sometimes the simplest act, saying no, is the strongest weapon a landowner has. And that evening, silence returned to the ranch, interrupted only by the cattle lowing in the field as if to say they always knew the truth. This land belonged to its owner alone.